Hi. Now, I know a lot of the people who watch these tuition videos are PhatPhish users. And as PhatPhish is a scale calculator, I guess that means a lot of the people who watch these videos are interested in scale theory, music theory in general. And what I wanted to talk about in this video is the role that scales play in music. Now, something I heard another guitar teacher say just the other day. Very simple statement, very true. He said, scales aren't music. Music is built from notes that come from scales, but scales on their own, they're not music. They're a building block, they're a means to an end. But if you think about, say, the English language, you know, when we communicate, when we write, prose or poetry or lyrics or whatever, we're using words, and they're arranged in a particular order that gives them meaning, gives them some sort of emotional impact. We're not just reciting words straight out of the dictionary by rote. We're not just using raw letters. What we've got is it's assembled in some way to give it some sort of structure and meaning. And it's the same with music. If you learn a scale, that's great. You need to know how scales sound and the tonality that they have. But then you need to put them to work. You shouldn't just treat the scale as music. You treat the scale as something that allows you to take building blocks to go on and make music. Here's an example. Okay, let's start with a scale you probably know, the minor pentatonic. So we take an A minor pentatonic, starting from the A on the 5th fret on the top E string, and just play those notes from the scale descending. They're just notes from the scale. There's nothing particularly musical about that. But what I can do is I can play that just with a little bit of phrasing. I'm going to play exactly the same notes in exactly the same order, but all I'm going to do is I'm going to change the timing of that slightly and put a little bit more emphasis on some notes rather than others, and compare how that sounds to the original scale just descending. So we started off with that. How about something like this? Now that sounds a bit more musical, but it's basically that. Just the scale descending down to the E here, and then the 5th degree, and then back up. But all those notes are coming from the scale in sequence. Okay, so what I had there was some very simple changes in phrasing, but it made something go from being a straight descending scale into something that had a little bit more musical feel to it. And that's what I want you to think about. When you're playing, how are you phrasing the notes? If it's always just completely metrical, just going through scales or going through patterns, think about what you're doing. Is that really engaging the listener as much as it could, or are you really just kind of running through patterns? Now, I think every guitarist at some point in their formative years has played blues. You learn that minor pentatonic scale, and experiment with what you can do, and you come up with blues licks and blues riffs and so on. Now, a lot of guitarists take that and move on to other styles, jazz, rock, or whatever, or they develop that and become fully fledged blues guitarists. But I think blues is a good style to listen to, just to remind yourself about how important phrasing is. That's not to say there's not really good examples of phrasing in other styles, but just talking about blues in particular, you can come across some pieces of blues soloing where there's not a whole lot going on, there's not very many notes involved, but just the way that they're phrased. There's not a lot going on in that. It's just straight from the minor pentatonic, but phrasing it gives you some sort of emotion, some sort of feeling to the piece, and that's important. You know, you can think about music as being like language, like I was saying before. If you think about, you know, just a simple phrase, you know, if you're playing, you know, scales, you know, that's the cat sat on their mat. You know, it's monotone. It's, you know, it's straight out the words, straight out the dictionary. When we're talking, you know, we don't talk in a dull, monotone, you know, the cat sat on the mat. You know, we have phrasing, you know, the cat sat on the mat. We put some sort of emphasis on certain words, and it's the same with music. You know, that example I started with, I was using exactly the same notes in exactly the same order, but by putting a bit of emphasis on some notes rather than others, and gave the piece some inflection. It's the same there, where the cat sat on the mat is very monotone, but emphasising certain words, you know, it gives it some feeling. You know, what words am I emphasising? You know, you could use more complex language. You know, you're not just going to go down the scales. You know, you're going to use more complex words, more complex phrases. You know, you might want to say something in English or, you know, your mother tongue that, you know, it's using very flowery language or very romantic language or very dark language or whatever. You know, you've got a vast vocabulary of words to pick from, in the same way that when you're playing music in a particular key or whatever, you have notes from scale to pick from, and it's how you put those notes together. If you put them together so you know, you're speaking them quickly or you're speaking them slowly, or you're putting emphasis on certain things or whatever, and it's about how the piece comes across. You know, so you know, think about it like that. You know, how you talk, how you speak. It's a very natural thing to do. You just, without thinking, you will put emphasis on certain words, or use certain tones in your voice. And it's the same with, you know, if you're playing a solo, you'll phrase it in a particular way to put some sort of feeling over. Here's another linguistic example. We've got a natural tendency, if we're asking a question, that will raise our voice at the end of a sentence. So if I say to you, I'm sure you know what I mean by scale. It sounds like a statement, but if I say to you, I'm sure you know what I mean by scale, it's inviting a response from you. And you can think of the same thing in music, that if I'm playing a phrase, there's certain ways that I can phrase that, or just certain ways I can arrange the notes that make it feel resolved at the end of the phrase, or it feels less resolved. Okay, so let's just take some notes from a natural minor scale, and I'll show you kind of what I mean. Okay, so I'll just play something just based around the natural minor scale here. Okay, now I'm finishing on a note there that sounds quite resolved. Partway through the piece, I was finishing on that note. Playing a phrase like, I can't remember exactly how it went, but it was something like this, you know. You know, that note doesn't sound resolved, it wants to go somewhere. So, you know, partway through the piece, it gives you that piece of tension, it wants to go forward. And then we can resolve it by finishing off on something that goes, finishing on the root note. And that gives the piece a bit of feeling and a bit of emotion. It has movement in it. It wants to go on from here. It's quite happy to rest here. You know, and through that piece, I wasn't playing every note with the same duration. I was playing some notes longer, some notes shorter, to give it some structure, so it wasn't just note, 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 note. There was some sort of, some notes longer, some notes shorter. using some slides as well, just to lead your ear from one note to the other. And there's all sorts of things you can do when you're playing a piece, to just not play just the notes straight from the scale, sounding really derived. These are what I've shown you here. There's some really simple examples, but hopefully it gives you something to think about. How you phrase pieces when you're playing. Not just slavishly sticking to the scales, and being able to put some emphasis and time the notes. Think about what it is you're trying to convey. You're trying to convey tension, or you're trying to make it sound happy, you're trying to make it sound sad. There's so much you can do just by the way that you time the notes, the way you phrase them. That will give you that, and make a piece interesting, and make somebody react to it. I think that's a great thing that musicians can do, is we can play an arrangement of notes from from this fairly modest selection that we've got at our disposal, but we can invoke an emotion in somebody. I'll leave you with a thought. This is something that it absolutely fascinates me. If you think about the way the notes are laid out on the guitar, it looks like there's quite a lot, but there's not. There's only 12 notes here. From C through C sharp, D, D sharp, and that through to C an octave higher. Yeah, those 12 notes repeat themselves across a number of octaves. Fundamentally, we've only got 12 notes. Every piece of music, Western music, that you hear, whether it's Happy Birthday to You, whether it's Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, whether it's the heaviest of heavy metal from somebody like Metallica, or a piece of blues by Muddy Waters, any piece of music you hear will only have those 12 notes in it, or some of those 12 notes. If you think about the countless pieces of music, I don't know, hundreds of thousands, millions of pieces of music maybe, that we know and we can distinguish, and they sound so distinct from each other, they only use those 12 notes. So what is it that distinguishes Happy Birthday to You from Master of Puppets by Metallica? It's the selection of notes. It's how the notes are phrased, how they're put together, how they're grouped. And that's such a key skill to have. So if you think about how many pieces of music have ever been written in a major key. A major key sounds like that. It uses the major scale. So I can think of a piece of music written around a major scale. So many pieces of music have been written out using a major scale, but they don't all sound the same. What's the difference? It's the way that the notes are arranged, the way that the notes are timed, the way that they're phrased. And this is such a key skill to have, to be able to take the notes, so you know what you've got at your disposal, but to be able to hear, in your mind's ear, how you can arrange those to make them sound, whether happy or sad or dark or romantic or whatever. But it's about being able to phrase. So you really need to be able to play with your ears and with your heart, rather than just playing with your brain. If you play with your brain, you're just going through the motions. You're just playing, you're just playing scales. You're just playing pre-rehearsed patterns. You need to be creative. You need to hear. If you're playing over a chord progression, hear how those chords go together, and play something over the top that complements it, and phrase it, and time those notes so it conveys some sort of feeling, some sort of emotion, and will invoke a response in a reaction in the listener. Okay, that sadly isn't something that's easily taught. A lot of it just comes through practice, and you listening to what you're playing, and finding your mistakes, finding the things that you do well, and building on that. But certainly, think about how you phrase things in your music, rather than just playing scales and playing patterns. Okay, that's all for now, and hope to catch you in another video sometime soon. Bye for now.